Now, like a lot of you guys know, a few weeks ago, Pooh Shiesty got hit with a federal case involving Gucci Mane. And when the news first came out, it sounded crazy. Because this wasn't just a rapper getting arrested again. This was a rapper who had just came home, still had a name that meant something, and somehow, just a few months later, he was right back in the middle of another federal case. But this time, the case wasn't over a random street situation. According to prosecutors, this all started over a business meeting, or so Gucci Mane thought. A meeting with Gucci Mane about Pooh Shiesty's record deal. Pooh Shiesty had of course been signed to Gucci Mane's 1017 label for years, but according to prosecutors, he wasn't happy with the terms of his deal. So Gucci Mane traveled to Dallas for what was supposed to be a conversation about the contract and possibly Pooh Shiesty getting released from it. But once everyone got to the studio, things took a completely different turn. Gucci and his security team were inside the studio waiting for the meeting to start. Pooh Shiesty was there, his father was also there, and then rapper Big 30 was there, and then several other men allegedly came into the building through a side entrance. So what was supposed to be a private business conversation started looking like something way more serious. At one point, Pooh Shiesty and Gucci Mane went into a separate room to talk about the contract, and then Pooh Shiesty pulled out paperwork and tried to get Gucci to sign that paperwork so he can get released from his contract. And then later on, Pooh Shiesty grabbed an AK-style pistol and pointed it at Gucci Mane while demanding that he sign this paperwork. Now these are of course allegations, but it's a federal case. However, Pooh Shiesty has not been convicted in this particular case, but prosecutors are saying that Gucci Mane was forced to sign the paperwork at gunpoint and that someone recorded him saying he was releasing Pooh Shiesty from the contract. That's obviously not how things work, but this is what he did. So legally that doesn't do anything in this case, right? Somebody signs a contract while a gun is pointed at them. That's not a real business agreement. That's coercion. And this is when our conversation about Pooh Shiesty's record deal came into the equation. Because if Pooh Shiesty really had issues with his contract, that part by itself isn't crazy. A lot of artists, but specifically rappers, go through that. They sign when they're young, they sign when they're hungry, they sign before they fully understand what ownership, publishing, advances, recoupment, and all of that really means. Then years later, when the money starts coming in, they start realizing that the deal they signed might not be as good as they thought it was. So wanting to get out of a deal isn't the shocking part. The shocking part is what really happened in this situation. Gucci in the end allegedly signed the paperwork, but it didn't stop there because they actually ended up robbing him of his wedding ring, watch, earrings, and cash. And if you guys remember, the particular details of what they actually did was really crazy because they choked somebody from Gucci's team from behind to the point where he almost lost consciousness. And it was also interesting how some of the stolen items had Apple AirTags attached to them. Maybe Gucci Mane in the end was thinking that something might happen if I go into this business meeting, right? I don't really know. But that later helped investigators track where some of those items went. And of course, they had surveillance footage, cell phone data, license plate reader data, hotel footage, rental car records, fingerprints, social media posts, and electronic monitoring data. Now, the biggest issue in this particular situation for Pooh Shiesty is that he was already a convicted felon who had been released early from federal prison and placed on home detention. Back in 2022, Pooh Shiesty was sentenced to 63 months in prison after pleading guilty in a firearms conspiracy case. So by the time this Gucci Mane situation allegedly happened, he was already under federal supervision and wearing an ankle monitor. And according to prosecutors, the ankle monitor actually placed him at the studio. And before that, during the height of his blowup, he had already been connected to multiple legal situations. There was of course the South Florida strip club shooting where he was accused of firing a gun and hitting a security guard in the ankle. Then there was the Bay Harbor Island shooting, where two men ended up hospitalized after what reportedly started as a meetup involving shoes, marijuana, and a rented green McLaren. And eventually Pooh Shiesty pleaded guilty to a federal conspiracy charge and got sentenced to a little over 5 years. And by late 2025, he was out on home detention. So this was supposed to be his second chance. People still cared about Pooh Shiesty, but then he ended up in the middle of another federal case. So when Pooh Shiesty was released, he had a bunch of conditions. He wasn't allowed to have weapons. He wasn't supposed to be around people with weapons and gang members and all that stuff. And he was supposed to stay within the limits of his home detention. Now let's talk about some of these latest updates, because Pooh Shiesty's case is now officially moving forward. A trial date has been set for July 6th. His father has been ordered released from federal custody, but Pooh Shiesty himself was denied bond. And that's where there's a lot of questions, because in a lot of these cases, you see people get arrested, post bond, and fight the case from the outside. But in Pooh Shiesty's case, the judge wasn't willing to let him out. And in his particular situation, the judge found there was credible evidence presented at the hearing initially when he was arrested. The court also thought that it wouldn't really make sense for him to be released to the public due to public safety. So basically, the judge looked at the seriousness of the charges and the fact that there were firearms involved here, and the fact that this entire case actually carries a potential life sentence for Pooh Shiesty, and the fact that Pooh Shiesty was already on home detention when this allegedly happened. So from the court's perspective, that was enough to keep him locked up while the case moves forward. And that is a big deal because bond isn't just about whether somebody's famous or whether they have money or whether they have people willing to vouch for them. The judge is looking at risk at the end of the day. Are you a flight risk? Are you a danger to the community? And can they trust that you're going to follow the rules if they let you out? And in Pooh Shiesty's situation, the problem is obvious. He was already out on a bunch of conditions and his movements were pretty limited and he was already being monitored. But he still ended up in Dallas in the middle of this situation. So if those conditions didn't stop him from doing all this crazy stuff here, why would more conditions suddenly be enough now? Now, his lawyer at the time actually pushed back on the government's case, and he pointed out that prosecutors waited around 3 months before bringing charges. So from his perspective, that delay raises a lot of questions about how solid the case really is. He also questioned the evidence prosecutors don't have. According to him, they don't have the alleged contract, they don't have the alleged video of Gucci Mane signing the contract, they don't have the guns, they don't have the jewelry, and that's the defense angle. So his defense is basically saying the government is relying on a lot of circumstantial evidence, but they're missing some of the most important physical pieces. And to be fair, that is something they can't argue for, because the prosecutors are saying someone was forced to sign a contract at gunpoint, but they don't have the paperwork or they don't have the video. That gives the defense something to work with. But at the same time, the government doesn't need every single piece of evidence to build a case. They can still try to connect the dots through location data, surveillance footage, witness statements, phone records, fingerprints, vehicle records, and social media posts. And a lot of Pooh Shiesty's buddies, they were dumb enough to flex a lot of these items that they robbed from Gucci Mane and his team on social media. So there's that. And at the end of the day, they have a bunch of other stuff like license plate reader, data that track the vehicles and the entire group. And then they, of course, stayed at a Comfort Inn in Dallas. And then they have hotel footage, which showed the individuals wearing the clothes that matched what was seen around the time of the robbery. And then they, of course, have fingerprints from the items left behind at the studio, including red plastic cups. It's just really crazy how they posted a lot of this stuff on social media. I really don't get it. That part is extremely hard to understand, but then again, we've seen worse in the past. Now, another interesting update is Pooh Shiesty's father, Lontrell Williams Sr., was also charged in this case, and honestly, the fact that his father was allegedly involved at all is one of the strangest parts of the story, because the OGs are supposed to teach these kids, man. I mean, really think about it. When you think about somebody coming home from prison, getting another shot at life and trying to rebuild their career, the last person you would expect to be caught up in this situation with them is their own father. But that's beside the point. A federal judge actually denied the government's request to revoke his release, so Pooh Shiesty's father has been ordered released from federal custody while Pooh Shiesty himself remains locked up. And that tells you something important. The court is not treating everyone the exact same way just because they're charged in the same case. Obviously, the judge is looking at each person individually, their alleged role, their criminal history, their bond conditions, their risk level, their connection to the actual evidence, whether they were already under supervision or not, whether weapons were involved, and whether the court believes they can safely be released. So in Pooh Shiesty's case, the court clearly saw him as a bigger concern. And that's why his father being ordered released doesn't mean the case is falling apart. It just means that the judge looked at his father's situation differently than Pooh Shiesty's. So the court is obviously not treating everyone the same exact way here. It's really crazy how Pooh Shiesty literally had everything. And then after getting a second chance at life, basically, he ends up with another federal case that could potentially take everything away. And when it comes to exactly why he did it, we all know that this wasn't some random argument that got out of hand. This was a full-on robbery and kidnapping situation that started because he wanted to get out of his deal with Gucci Mane. And that brings up another question. What kind of deal was he actually in? Now, to be clear, we don't know the exact details of Pooh Shiesty's contract, so I'm not going to sit here and act like I know what was going on behind the scenes, but in the music industry, a lot of artists sign deals early, especially when they're young, and years later, when the money starts coming in, they realize the paperwork they signed might not be as sweet as they thought it was. That's where you hear people talk about 360 deals, bad contracts, labels taking a percentage of everything, artists not knowing exactly what they own, and people realizing way too late they didn't fully understand what they actually signed. And this is why it's so important for artists to have their own lawyer, not a lawyer the label recommends, okay? That's how you get finessed. That shit's a scam, okay? Not somebody connected to the people you're signing with. Your own lawyer. Because if the people you're about to sign with are also helping you find the person who's supposed to protect you from them, that should already tell you something. You're about to get finessed. But even if Pooh Shiesty was unhappy with his deal, that still doesn't excuse what prosecutors are accusing him of. At some point, you have to handle business like business. You get lawyers, you negotiate, you take it to court, you fight it properly. What you don't do is pull up with a bunch of goons, pressure somebody into signing paperwork, and turn a contract dispute into a federal robbery and kidnapping case. That shit's crazy. Because even if you feel like you got finessed, once you respond like that, you end up making your own situation 10 times worse. I mean, if you really think about it, Gucci Mane still right now, even after all this, he still owns Pooh Shiesty's work. Or should I say a part of his work. So all that FDO money, well, that's going, or part of it's going to Gucci Mane, okay? So really in the end, it's like he didn't really get what he wanted anyway. So basically all the shit that he did was for absolutely nothing. I mean, is it really worth it to have your freedom restricted and now you can't run up a bag in the outside world and make a bunch of moves? And that's what this story really shows. That street mindset and mentality can get you noticed. It can help you feed into a certain image that you might be trying to build. And it can give you a certain edge from a certain perspective, right? But when you bring that same mindset into business, it can destroy everything because business has its own kind of ruthlessness. And I remember 50 Cent actually explained this perfectly in an interview. He basically said there are people in the business world who are way more ruthless than people in the streets.
There's more ruthless people in the business world than in the street. You know, like they just have subtlety to their tactic. How they do things is more, you know, it's not confrontational.
They just don't do it with guns. They do it with paperwork. They do it with contracts. They do it in a suit and tie. And that's the part a lot of people don't understand. The business world can rob you too. But the difference is if someone robs you through a contract, you can't respond like you're still in the streets. You have to be smarter. You have to build a team. You have to learn the game. You have to put people in positions to protect you. And that's where a lot of artists mess up. They might get the money, they'll get the fame, and they'll get a bunch of people around them, but they still don't really have systems in place to protect themselves. I remember hearing something about Taylor Swift, where it's been said that she basically has people watching over the people she hired. And that might sound extreme, but it makes a lot of sense. Because once you reach a certain level, it's not enough to just hire one person and hope everything is being handled properly. You need lawyers, you need checks and balances. You need people who can catch problems before they turn into bigger problems. Because if one person is watching the money and another person is checking that person, now you're not just trusting one person with your entire business and livelihood. You're building a system. And that's what a lot of artists don't realize early enough. But then again, it's really hard to realize it when you're in it. So the streets might teach you how to survive pressure, but business teaches you how to survive paperwork. Because in business, you're not always going to get the deal you want. You're not always going to feel like you got treated fairly. And sometimes you might even feel like somebody played you and finessed you. But even then, you still have to handle things as professionally as you can. If you're going to be ruthless in business, be ruthless with that paperwork. Be ruthless with lawyers. Be ruthless with your strategy, not threats, not coercion, not kidnapping allegations. And that's why a lot of people don't like doing business with people who have this type of mindset, not because they come from the streets. The issue is they don't know how to handle conflict without taking it there. And even if Pooh Shiesty somehow beats this case, there's still another problem, which is his reputation. Because in music, and honestly in business in general, right, your reputation is everything. If people are scared to do business with you, they're not going to say it publicly. They're just not going to make that call. They're not going to meet you. They're not going to invest in you. They're not going to take that risk of working with you. And that might be one of the biggest consequences for Pooh Shiesty here, aside from the fact that he's now inside a cell with other men. Even if he ends up walking away from this legally, people in the music industry are still gonna look at his situation and ask themselves one question. Do I really want to be in business with somebody where a contract dispute could allegedly turn into this? I mean, who the fuck actually wants to be held at gunpoint? That doesn't sound like a fun thing. And a lot of times too, situations like that can turn into somebody losing their life. That's why they're so dangerous. And that's why Pooh Shiesty is facing life in prison here. Also, he was a convicted felon and he did this in Texas, which is basically the worst place to commit any crimes because they gon' hold you accountable, that's for sure. If you want to up the K, don't do it in Texas because they don't play. Really random, but I think if every place handled crime like Texas does, the world, I think, would be a better place. That's what I think. But what do you think? And that's why this case is so damaging. It's not just about prison time. It's about trust. It's about reputation. It's about whether people will ever look at him as someone they can safely do business with. So the trial date for this particular case has been set. His father has been ordered released. Pooh Shiesty himself is still locked up. And as more updates come out, I'm of course going to keep you guys updated. But as of right now, this is where things stand. Pooh Shiesty came home with a second chance, and now he might lose everything. If you made it this far, drop a like on this video, and of course subscribe if you're new here. I'm very curious what you guys think about this Pooh Shiesty update. This might be a generational crash out right here, honestly. But anyway, we'll find out more very soon what happens. And like I said, I'll keep you guys updated, okay? Y'all let me know in the comment section below. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace, I'm out.